When a maritime strait 7,000 miles away suddenly closes, the political physics in Washington instantly rewrite themselves. We are watching a distant military engagement rapidly transform into a direct tax on an American executive mandate, and it's fracturing an already fragile social contract. Let's look at exactly how this cascade effect actually works.
That global shock translates immediately to the local gas pump. A national average of $4.45 a gallon isn't just a fluctuating economic metric, it's an unavoidable, highly visible tax on the electorate. It shows ordinary people exactly how fast global instability eats away at their domestic purchasing power, and that kind of daily pressure fundamentally changes how voters view the competence of their leadership.
And this transmission mechanism moves incredibly fast. In February, we see joint U.S.-Israeli strikes against Iranian infrastructure. By March, 3 separate carrier strike groups are deployed in the region, which is the largest buildup we've seen since 2003. Then, by April, we hit a dual blockade. We are watching the exact logistics of how a military deployment in the Persian Gulf almost instantly becomes a domestic energy chokehold.
The institutional math here is completely unforgiving. Between February and March of 2026, overall consumer inflation jumps to 3.3%. But the real structural fracture point is energy. An abrupt 12.5% spike in energy inflation is exactly the kind of single data point that breaks domestic political coalitions. It's the heavy, tangible burden of a geopolitical trigger landing directly on consumers who are already highly anxious about their baseline finances.
That kind of economic reality acts like an anvil on public sentiment. A 58% executive disapproval rating is a historic high. This isn't just a cyclical dip in popularity or a rough month of polling. It represents a deep structural crack in the coalition that formed the governing mandate just 2 years prior, driven entirely by the compounding weight of inflation mixed with military conflict.
Notice what's missing here. The political middle ground is completely evaporating. When you look at the intensity gap, 51% of respondents strongly disapprove of the executive's performance. That is more than double those who strongly approve. When the middle vanishes like this, you're left with a highly energized, deeply polarized opposition. It's a massive leading indicator of systemic stress heading into an election cycle.
Section 1. Restructuring the safety net.
The One Big Beautiful Bill Act was marketed heavily as a working families tax cut, but look past the partisan framing for a second and examine the structural reality. It projects a massive decrease in federal Medicaid outlays, somewhere up to $990 billion. Between the new 80-hour work requirements and expiring ACA subsidies, nearly 12 million Americans are facing a steep coverage cliff by 2034. It's a fundamental restructuring of how the state supports its most vulnerable populations, and it's happening exactly when basic living costs are spiking.
Compounding this domestic friction is Operation Metro Surge. Backed by a $170 billion budget, this aims for 1 million removals per year, making it the largest immigration enforcement operation in U.S. history. Hitting massive logistical targets of that scale requires highly aggressive domestic enforcement, and that approach is generating intense social friction, particularly among suburban and moderate voter blocs, who are becoming increasingly wary of the civil liberties implications. That friction gets massively amplified by highly publicized encounters. In early 2026, domestic operations resulted in the deaths of U.S. citizens in Minneapolis. Incidents like these have blurred traditional law enforcement boundaries and sparked nationwide concern. By pursuing these aggressive logistical quotas, the administration is inadvertently alienating key demographics and injecting severe anxiety into an already incredibly tense environment.
Section 2. The asymmetric map.
There is a massive contradiction right now between the atmospheric public anger and the sheer mathematical reality of the map. The opposition clearly holds a generic ballot advantage of roughly 5 to 10 points. However, aggressive gerrymandering means fewer than 20 House seats are actually true toss-ups. Because 90% of incumbents won their last races by wide margins, a huge popular vote wave simply doesn't guarantee a systemic change in power. The district maps are acting as a structural seawall against voter momentum.
Then you have the opposition's own institutional hurdle, which is the brand penalty. Even with the current administration facing historic disapproval, the Democratic Party holds a 59% unfavorable rating. Analysts estimate this brand weakness inherently subtracts over 20 seats from their potential total right out of the gate. Neither side commands broad public trust right now, and that severely limits the mechanics of electoral shifts. And yet, the internal anxiety within the governing coalition is just impossible to ignore.
Look at today's environment compared to the 2006 midterms, when President Bush faced a similar storm of an unpopular Middle East conflict paired with soaring energy costs. In 2006, 17 GOP House members retired. In 2026, that number has jumped to 38. Record retirements like this are a blaring institutional siren. They signal deep internal frustration and a profound lack of confidence in the governing mandate.
To capitalize on this specific vulnerability, the opposition has executed a major strategic pivot. They are actively moving away from cultural debates and rolling out the Affordability Agenda, which focuses squarely on economic security. They are targeting household costs, housing supply, and healthcare access. It's a highly calculated play designed specifically for the 66% of swing voters who explicitly say their lives are noticeably less affordable today than they were just a year ago.
This systemic strain really highlights a core political reality. A mandate isn't just one at the ballot box, it's maintained at the gas pump and the doctor's office. Right now, both of those are overdrawn. The working-class voter is caught in a brutal vice, squeezed from the outside by global energy shocks and squeezed from the inside by the dismantling of domestic safety nets. Which brings us to the great, unresolved structural tension of this era. There is a fundamental clash between the nationalist economic promise of domestic price stability and the massive financial reality of projecting high-intensity military power abroad. The system is visibly struggling to reconcile an America First agenda with the unforgiving physics of a globalized energy market. So as capital movement, domestic politics, and these severe geopolitical pressures continue to collide, we have to ask, does the sheer cost of global military enforcement inherently undermine the promise of domestic economic stability? It is a question of structural balance and institutional limits that will ultimately define the trajectory of the next decade.
An investment in knowledge pays the best interest, so why not invest in this channel? Click like and subscribe for more.